I think I made the mistake when I allowed him to get close to me. Or was it when I finally gave in to sleep with him? I don't even know how it all went wrong. What wasn't there to go wrong? Our relationship was wrong in the first place. I wasn't supposed to visit him in his house. If only I had persuaded him to change our meeting venue. Marcus was every girl's dream. Tall, dark-skinned, and strikingly handsome. He was quiet, funny, and smart. What wasn't there to like about him? But I didn't budge when he approached me in our senior secondary school, too. He just wanted to be my friend, and I was fine with that. Over time, we became close friends, and I only discovered my feelings for him in the third term. He didn't have to know. I kept it to myself, except it became extremely difficult to hide since he was always around me. I tried avoiding him, but it didn't work out. I just couldn't do it. And before I could ponder my next action, I went to him, confessing all my feelings and emotions. It seems he was charming me and waiting for the moment I fell for his charms. But it had nothing to do with his charms, it was my self-control that broke loose. We started dating, and by the time we got to SS3, everyone already knew we were together. Our relationship wasn't hidden from any of our classmates, and I didn't mind at all. In fact, I didn't care. We got along so well, supposedly helping each other with schoolwork. The teachers also knew about this. I can remember one of my teachers, Mrs. Adebayo, calling me to advise me after hearing about my relationship. "Sophia," she said, concern evident in her eyes. "You're a brilliant student with a promising future. Don't let romance distract you from your studies." I nodded politely, but her words barely registered. In my 17-year-old mind, Marcus and I had it all figured out. We would excel academically while nurturing our relationship. It seemed so simple then. It all went wrong when our relationship developed into one of touching and kissing. We made out a few times, sometimes in my house, sometimes in his. We introduced each other to our families as reading partners, and since we both had good results to show we were both intelligent, our parents accepted our relationship as just that, reading partners. It was easy. My mother thought he was an intelligent boy who was helping me with my studies, and his parents thought I was an intelligent reading partner. We continued this way until one day when he wanted to go beyond the usual kissing and touching. I stopped him and said I wasn't ready for this. He kissed my forehead and told me he was patient. "I would never pressure you, Sophia," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "I'll wait until you're ready." His words made me feel safe, respected. Little did I know that patience would be our undoing. We wouldn't have realized it was all wrong. We wouldn't have known the implications of teen pregnancy on the day I visited him under the guise that I was coming to read with him. He was home alone. His parents had traveled, and his elder sister who lived with them wasn't going to be back until midnight. I was ready and decided to finally take that step with him. I was ready at 17 to take that step with him, and I was convinced it was the right time. But I didn't think about protection. After all, it would be a one-time experience. That was all I held in my heart when I gave him my virginity that afternoon. The house was quiet except for our breathing. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting patterns on the bedroom wall. There was nervousness, excitement, and a profound sense that we were crossing a threshold from which there was no return. I quickly got my books and kissed him before leaving that day, but I didn't know I was going to become pregnant. I found this out 2 weeks later. The missed period, the morning sickness that I initially dismissed as a stomach bug, they all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. I took a pregnancy test, hands shaking, and when those 2 lines appeared, I cried all alone for days. I couldn't tell my parents, and I couldn't even tell Marcus he was going to be a father. He had plans to become a neurosurgeon. Such a big dreamer. How could I destroy it with this mistake in my womb? My parents, very busy people at that time, didn't notice any of this happening, and I wasn't going to tell them. My father, a bank executive, often left before dawn and returned after I was asleep. My mother, running her own business, was equally absent. It was easy to hide my condition from them, at least initially. Going to school wasn't easy with all the nausea I felt sometimes, and I didn't want any of my teachers or friends to notice. I had to find a solution, and quick. Maybe I should go for an abortion. I had thought about this for a very long time, the disgrace and shame I would face for this mistake I made. The fear crept in, and very soon, I found myself staring at the rope under our stairs. The only solution was to end it all. Yes, I'll get the rope and tie it to the ceiling pin, and then I wasn't just thinking about this, I was doing it. And that was when Marcus and my parents walked in on me and saved me immediately from killing myself. What do I tell my parents? How will I apologize for the shame I brought into the family? Why was Marcus with my parents, and why was it at this time I was about to end it all? How will Marcus take this? What happens to me? What happens to my life, my education? The expression on my mother's face as she saw me standing on a chair, rope in hand, is something I'll never forget. Pure terror, followed by a guttural cry that didn't even sound human. My father froze in the doorway, his briefcase dropping to the floor with a thud that echoed through our suddenly silent home. But it was Marcus who moved first, lunging forward and pulling me down from the chair, the rope falling useless to the floor. "What are you doing?" he screamed, tears streaming down his face. "Sophia, what are you doing?" I collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The secret I'd been carrying for weeks burst out of me like a dam breaking. "I'm pregnant," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm pregnant, and I didn't know what to do." My mother's wail cut through the room like a knife. My father stumbled backward, reaching for support against the wall. Marcus, my sweet, ambitious Marcus, simply held me tighter, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Later, sitting in our living room, the four of us surrounded by a heavy silence, I learned why Marcus had come with my parents. He had noticed my withdrawal, my paleness, my frequent rushes to the bathroom at school. Concerned, he had approached my mother at her shop that afternoon, sharing his worries about my health. They had decided to come home early to check on me, perhaps take me to a doctor. Instead, they found me attempting to take my own life. "How could you even think of doing this?" my mother asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Nothing is worth your life, Sophia. Nothing." My father, a man of few words, simply sat with his head in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "We failed you," he said. "We were so busy providing for your future that we forgot to be present in your now." Marcus sat beside me, holding my hand so tightly it almost hurt. "I should have been more responsible," he said, eyes downcast. "This is my fault too." The days that followed were a blur of doctor's appointments, family meetings, and tears, so many tears. My pregnancy was confirmed. I was 6 weeks along. My parents, after the initial shock, rallied around me with a support I never expected. "You will finish your education," my father declared firmly. "This changes your path, but not your destination." My mother, though deeply disappointed, became my fiercest advocate. "We will face this as a family," she said. "The gossip, the judgment, let them talk. We protect our own." Marcus's parents reacted with a similar mix of disappointment and eventual support. His father, a doctor himself, arranged for my prenatal care. His mother, after a week of barely speaking to either of us, came to our house with baby clothes she had begun to knit. "I always wanted grandchildren," she said with a sad smile. "Just not quite so soon." School became a battlefield. Despite the principal's assurances of discretion, news of my condition spread like wildfire. The whispers, the stares, the sudden silence when I entered a room, each day was an exercise in endurance. Some friends stood by me, others drifted away as if pregnancy was contagious. Mrs. Adebayo, the teacher who had once warned me about romance, became an unexpected ally, arranging for me to take exams in private rooms when morning sickness was particularly bad. Marcus never wavered. His dream of becoming a neurosurgeon didn't disappear, but it adjusted to include me and our child. He studied twice as hard, applied for scholarships that would accommodate a family, and spent every free moment either with me or working part-time jobs to save money. "We made this life together," he would say, hands resting gently on my growing belly. "We'll build our future together too." If you're enjoying this story so far, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps me create more content like this, and I'd love to have you join our community. As my due date approached, the reality of impending parenthood became more tangible. My mother converted a corner of my bedroom into a nursery. Marcus and I attended parenting classes after school, often the youngest couple by decades. We learned to change diapers, to swaddle, to recognize different cries. The birth itself was both more terrifying and more beautiful than I could have imagined. 19 hours of labor, my mother and Marcus on either side of me, coaching, encouraging, sometimes just holding my hands as I screamed through contractions. When they placed our daughter on my chest, tiny and red-faced and perfect, I understood something profound. This wasn't the end of my life, as I had feared in those dark moments with the rope. It was a beginning, unexpected, challenging, but filled with a love I hadn't known was possible. We named her Hope. The first year of Hope's life taught me more than all my years of schooling combined. I learned to function on minimal sleep, to study with a baby nestled in one arm, to prioritize in ways my teenage self could never have imagined. My bedroom became a strange hybrid of nursery and study hall, textbooks piled alongside stacks of diapers, mathematical formulas scribbled on the same pages as feeding schedules. My parents, especially my mother, were our salvation. She adjusted her work hours to help care for Hope while Marcus and I attended school. My father, initially awkward around the tiny, fragile baby, gradually found his footing as a grandfather, often walking Hope around the garden in the evenings, pointing out birds and flowers as she cooed in response. "She has your curiosity," he told me once, a note of pride in his voice that I hadn't heard since before my pregnancy. Marcus's family stepped up too. His mother watched Hope 2 days a week, and his sister, initially scandalized by our situation, became a doting aunt who brought too many toys and insisted on taking monthly photos to document Hope's growth. School remained challenging. I returned 6 weeks after giving birth, determined not to fall behind. The whispers had somewhat subsided, replaced by a different kind of attention. Classmates curious about the baby, teachers either overly accommodating or pointedly distant, as if teen parenthood reflected on their educational abilities. I missed parties, school trips, the carefree afternoons of just hanging out that my peers took for granted. There were days I resented the weight of responsibility, moments I locked myself in the bathroom and cried for the normal teenage life I would never have. But there were also unexpected joys. Hope's first smile, directed at Marcus as he sang her a lullaby, the peaceful weight of her sleeping on my chest as I read biology textbooks, the fierce, protective love that surged through me whenever I looked at her perfect little face. Marcus and I grew up fast, too fast, some might say. Our relationship transformed from teenage romance to parenthood partnership, a shift that brought growing pains along with deepened connection. "Sometimes I miss just being your boyfriend," Marcus admitted one night as we sat exhausted after finally getting Hope to sleep. "But I wouldn't trade this, our family, for anything." I understood exactly what he meant. We mourned our lost adolescence even as we embraced our new reality. Our final year of secondary school coincided with Hope's first birthday. Against all odds, Marcus maintained his top academic standing. I slipped from second in our class to fifth, a disappointment until my father pointed out the extraordinary nature of even completing school while raising a child. "You're not running the same race as your classmates," he said. "The fact that you're on the track at all is remarkable." University presented new challenges. I deferred for a year, focusing on Hope while working part-time at a local bookstore. Marcus, having secured a prestigious scholarship that barely covered his own expenses, began his pre-med studies at Icordu University, commuting 2 hours each way to save on housing costs. We saw each other on weekends, exhausted but determined to make our unconventional family work. Hope, now a toddler with Marcus's easy smile and my stubborn nature, became the center of our fragmented world. When I finally started university myself, studying education with a focus on early childhood development, we established a precarious balance of childcare, classes, part-time jobs, and the rare, precious moments of just being together. There were arguments about money, time, priorities, the inequitable division of parental responsibilities that seemed to fall heavier on my shoulders despite our best intentions. There were nights I questioned every decision, days I envied my childless classmates with their simple concerns about exams and social lives. But there was also profound growth. I developed patience, resilience, and an efficiency I never would have cultivated otherwise. Marcus, though occasionally frustrated by the constraints on his study time, found that fatherhood gave him a compassion and perspective that enhanced his preparation for medicine. Hope thrived despite, or perhaps because of, our unusual family structure. Surrounded by people who adored her, she grew into a bright, curious child who easily made friends at her daycare and delighted in helping me study by scribbling in the margins of my notebooks. On her 4th birthday, as we celebrated with both our families gathered in my parents' garden, I looked around at the people who had supported us through what could have been a tragedy, but had somehow transformed into an unexpected blessing. My mother, arguing good-naturedly with Marcus's mother about whether Hope should have another piece of cake. My father, teaching Hope to throw a ball while Marcus's father offered exaggerated commentary. Marcus's sister, pregnant now herself and asking me quiet questions about childbirth. And Marcus, watching me from across the garden with the same warm eyes that had captivated me years ago in our classroom. Later that night, after Hope was asleep in her little bed, Marcus took my hand and led me to the garden swing. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your parents and I hadn't walked in that day?" he asked softly, referencing the moment that still occasionally haunted my dreams, me, the rope, the desperate belief that ending my life was the only solution. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But then I look at Hope, at you, at everything we've built despite how hard it's been, and I'm so grateful I'm still here." He squeezed my hand. "Me too. More than you could ever know." Before you continue with the rest of our story, if you're finding value in this narrative, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Your subscription means so much, and it helps ensure you never miss future stories like this one. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, before Marcus spoke again. "I don't regret any of it, you know," he said. "Not even the hardest parts. Every struggle brought us here, and here's exactly where I want to be." I rested my head on his shoulder, thinking about the girl I had been, frightened, desperate, seeing only the shame and restrictions of an unplanned pregnancy. I wished I could go back and tell her that while the path ahead would be harder than she could imagine, it would also bring joy and growth she couldn't yet comprehend. "I don't regret it either," I said, and meant it completely. As the years passed, our unconventional family found its rhythm. Marcus progressed through medical school, his determination unwavering despite the additional challenges of parenthood. I completed my education degree, finding unexpected fulfillment in teaching young children who reminded me daily of hope at various stages. Hope grew into a thoughtful, artistic child who inherited her father's analytical mind and my storytelling tendencies. By the time she was 10, she understood the unusual circumstances of her birth, not all the intimate details, but enough to know she had been born to teenage parents who had chosen to embrace their responsibilities despite enormous obstacles. "Were you scared?" she asked me once, curled beside me on our couch in the modest apartment we had finally been able to afford without my parents' direct support. "Terrified," I answered honestly. "But being scared of something doesn't mean you can't face it. Is that why you almost?" She trailed off, unable to articulate the concept of suicide at her age. My heart constricted. We had never hidden this part of our story from her, believing that honesty, age-appropriate but complete, was the foundation of our family. Still, hearing her reference that darkest moment was painful. "That's exactly why," I said carefully. "I was so scared that I couldn't see any other way out. But I was wrong, Hope. There's always another path, even when it seems impossible to find." She nodded, processing this with the seriousness that sometimes made her seem older than her years. "I'm glad Daddy and Grandma and Grandpa found you in time." "Me too, sweetheart," I whispered, holding her close. "More than you can possibly know." Marcus completed his medical training when Hope was 12, specializing ultimately in pediatric neurology, a choice influenced, he said, by watching our daughter's brain and personality develop in ways that fascinated him daily. His first position as a fully qualified doctor brought financial stability we had only dreamed of during our struggling student years. We moved to a small house with a garden where Hope could keep the pets she had long desired, but our apartment hadn't allowed. My own career evolved alongside his. From classroom teaching, I transitioned to developing educational programs for children in hospitals, combining my professional skills with the personal understanding I'd gained through Marcus's medical journey. On quiet evenings, when Hope was absorbed in homework or out with friends, Marcus and I sometimes marveled at how far we had come from those frightened teenagers facing an unplanned pregnancy. Do you ever wonder what our lives would be like if we hadn't had Hope when we did? I asked him once. He considered this thoughtfully, the contemplative expression I had first fallen in love with crossing his face. Different, certainly. Maybe easier in some ways. But I'm not convinced they would be better. I understood what he meant. Parenthood had forced us to mature quickly, to develop resilience and purpose that many of our peers were still discovering in their 30s. Our path had been harder, but it had also been rich with meaning and growth that might otherwise have taken decades to achieve. When Hope turned 17, the age I had been when I became pregnant with her, a strange full-circle feeling pervaded our household. I found myself watching her with her friends, particularly the boy she had been dating for several months, with an awareness both painful and poignant. One evening, gathering my courage, I approached her room and knocked softly. "Hope? Can we talk?" She looked up from her computer, headphones around her neck. "Sure, Mom. What's up?" I sat on the edge of her bed, suddenly unsure how to begin this conversation that had been building in my mind for months. "You're the same age now that I was when I had you," I said finally. She nodded, her expression softening. "I've been thinking about that too. I want you to know that your father and we don't regret having you. Not for one moment. But we do regret the circumstances, the lack of planning, the choices we made without understanding the consequences." Hope moved from her desk to sit beside me on the bed. "Mom, I know all this. We've talked about it before." "Yes, but now you're at the age where..." I hesitated, searching for the right words. "I want better for you than we had for ourselves. Not because our lives turned out badly, they didn't. But because you deserve the chance to choose your path without the constraints we faced." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Is this about Jaden?" Jaden, her boyfriend of nearly a year. A good kid, by all accounts respectful, intelligent, with ambitions of becoming an engineer. Still, I couldn't help but see echoes of Marcus and me in their earnest young relationship. Partly, I admitted. "I know you're smart, Hope. Smarter about these things than I was. But emotions can cloud judgment, and I just want you to be prepared, to be careful." She surprised me by taking my hand. "Mom, we've had this talk. Multiple times. Dad even took me to his clinic to discuss birth control options with Dr. Amina last year. This was news to me." "He did?" She nodded. "He said he trusted me to make good decisions, but wanted to make sure I had all the information and resources I needed to protect myself." A wave of gratitude for Marcus washed over me. While I had been worrying about how to have this conversation, he had simply ensured our daughter was equipped with knowledge and options. "Besides," Hope continued, "Jaden and I have talked about this too. We're not ready for that step yet, and when we are, if we are, we'll be careful." She squeezed my hand. "I've had the world's most comprehensive education on the consequences of unprotected sex, Mom. Living it with you and Dad taught me more than any school program ever could." I laughed, tears springing to my eyes at her wisdom and maturity. "When did you get so grown up?" "I had good teachers," she said simply. That night, I recounted the conversation to Marcus as we prepared for bed. "You took her to discuss birth control and didn't tell me?" I asked, more curious than accusatory. He shrugged, looking slightly sheepish. "She asked me not to. Said she was worried you'd overthink it and turn it into a bigger deal than it needed to be." I threw a pillow at him, laughing despite myself. "She knows me too well." "She knows us both too well," he agreed, catching the pillow. "But that's not a bad thing, is it? We've always been honest with her." "No, it's not a bad thing," I conceded. "I just hope all this honesty and preparation means her path will be easier than ours was." Marcus pulled me into his arms. Our path wasn't so bad in the end, was it? Harder, longer, with more obstacles than we expected. But it brought us here, and here is pretty wonderful. Looking around at our comfortable home, thinking of our remarkable daughter and the life we had painstakingly built together, I had to agree. What had once seemed like the end of all my dreams had instead been the beginning of a different, deeper kind of fulfillment. No regrets? Marcus asked, an echo of conversations we'd had many times over the years. No regrets, I confirmed, meaning it as completely as I had that night on the garden swing, years earlier. Just gratitude that we found our way through. On Hope's 18th birthday, Marcus and I gave her a journal I had started writing shortly after her birth. It chronicled our journey, the fears, the struggles, the moments of joy and despair that had shaped our little family. We want you to understand where you came from, Marcus explained as she turned the pages with careful fingers. Not just the difficult beginning, but everything that came after, how much you were loved, how completely you changed our lives for the better. Hope read snippets aloud, laughing at some entries, growing solemn at others. When she reached the final page, she found a letter we had written together just days earlier. "Dear Hope," she read, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "As you stand on the threshold of adulthood, we want you to know this. You were not a mistake. You were unplanned, yes, but from the moment we knew of your existence, you became the center of our world. The path we traveled was harder because of our youth, but infinitely more meaningful because of you. We watch you now, brilliant, compassionate, wise beyond your years, and see not only the best parts of ourselves reflected back, but something entirely new and wonderful that is uniquely you. Whatever path you choose from here, know that we will support you with the same unwavering love that has carried our family through every challenge. The rope that once seemed the only answer has long since been replaced by the unbreakable bonds between us. Where there was once despair, you brought hope, living up to the name we gave you in that first miraculous moment we held you in our arms. All our love, always, Mom and Dad." Hope closed the journal, holding it against her chest. "Thank you," she said simply, words seemingly inadequate for the emotion of the moment. Later, after the party had ended and our house fell quiet, I found myself alone in the kitchen, washing the last of the dishes. Marcus appeared beside me, drying towel in hand, the teamwork that had sustained us for nearly 2 decades as natural as breathing. 18 years, he said softly. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that we were terrified teenagers in your parents' living room, trying to figure out how to be parents ourselves." I handed him a glass to dry. "And sometimes it feels like several lifetimes ago. Do you think we did all right?" he asked, a rare vulnerability in his voice. "As parents, I mean. Given how we started." I thought about Hope, her confidence, her kindness, her clear sense of self and purpose. I thought about the university acceptance letters already arriving, the bright future stretching before her unencumbered by the early parenthood that had complicated our own paths. "I think we did more than all right," I said. "I think we broke a cycle. We turned what could have been tragedy into something beautiful." Marcus set down his towel and pulled me into an embrace, both of us damp from dishwater and not caring in the slightest. "I've been thinking," he said against my hair. "Maybe we should start that teen parent support program we've talked about for years. Now that Hope is heading to university, we'll have time. And who better to guide other young parents than those who've walked the entire journey?" The idea resonated immediately. Throughout Hope's childhood, we had occasionally spoken to youth groups about teen pregnancy prevention, but always with the caveat that while prevention was ideal, compassion and support were essential for those already facing parenthood. "I'd like that," I agreed. To help other teenagers see that an unplanned pregnancy isn't the end of their story, just a difficult chapter in a longer narrative they still get to write. Marcus smiled, the same smile that had first caught my attention across a classroom 20 years earlier. From that darkest moment with the rope, to this, a life full enough that we can now extend help to others. It's quite a journey, isn't it? I thought about that desperate girl I had been, convinced that shame and failure were all that awaited me. I wished I could reach back through time and show her glimpses of what lay ahead. The challenges, yes, but also the profound joy, the growth, the love that expanded beyond anything she could have imagined. It is quite a journey, I agreed. And I'm grateful for every step of it, even the painful ones. If you've stayed with me until the end of the story, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit the subscribe button. Your subscription supports more content like this, and I'd love to continue sharing stories that explore the complexities of human experience with you. As we stood there in our kitchen, the evidence of our daughter's 18th birthday celebration surrounding us, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, our story would continue evolving as Hope created her own path and we discovered new chapters in our lives together. But a moment of recognition. What had once seemed like my greatest mistake had become the foundation of my richest blessings. I had made a choice all those years ago, standing with that rope, believing there was no way forward. I had been wrong. There is always a way forward, always light waiting beyond the darkness if we can just hold on long enough to find it. That, perhaps, was the greatest lesson of our journey, one I hoped would reach anyone listening who might be standing in their own moment of despair. Life rarely follows the paths we imagine for ourselves. Its greatest gifts often arrive in packages we never would have chosen. But within even our deepest struggles lie the seeds of transformation, waiting only for the courage to nurture them into bloom.